If you are unfamiliar, there is some discontent within the scientific community surrounding the crazy warming of 2023. Many people have attributed the high temperatures to the 2020 sulfur dioxide cap imposed by the International Maritime Organization. While some warming can be attributed to this protocol, I would do my best to provide context and argue why this implementation was necessary despite warming. So, what is sulfur dioxide and why do we want to cap it? Sulfur dioxide is a noxious gas released through cheap fuel combustion by boats, specifically shipping boats. The gas causes harmful effects on the respiratory system and disproportionately affects lower-income countries that are not necessarily releasing any of these emissions. It causes thousands of deaths per year, so naturally we would want to curb emissions. However, there's a complication. Sulfur dioxide has an extreme cooling effect on the climate. It has an albedo effect, which means that it reflects sunlight as it forms these reflective clouds in the atmosphere. These sulfur dioxide clouds have served as a kind of shield for global warming. As we release more and more carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, we've observed plenty of warming, but this warming has been buffered by these other emissions. This has somewhat prevented scientists from being able to predict accurate warming models based on anthropogenic emissions, anthropogenic meaning caused by human activity. Although the sulfurous clouds have a cooling effect amidst this deadly warming, they're still toxic pollutants in our atmosphere, leading to adverse health effects and deaths. So, the International Maritime Organization released a protocol in 2020 capping emissions to 0.5%, which is a stark decrease from the standard 3.5%. Studies have been released since then showing an increase in global warming that have been attributed to this protocol, but there are plenty of other factors that at play coming to create a big cluster of heat, leading to 2023 being the hottest year on record. We recently switched to the El Niño ocean current. There was an underwater volcanic eruption in the South Pacific that resulted in an El Niño-like ocean anomaly that further increased sea surface temperatures. There's been an absence of Saharan dust that typically reduces temperatures. These are all natural variations, not anthropogenic, but have greatly impacted the climate and combined with our anthropogenic warming from burning fossil fuels. Somewhat of a panic has arisen from the warming attributed to this protocol. People lost trust in climate scientists who advised this protocol and the International Maritime Organization who implemented it, assuming they did not accurately predict the warming. While much of our climate future remains uncertain, we can be sure that all anthropogenic emissions are negatively impacting our world. The IPCC, or Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, releases massive summaries of scientific research on climate change and advises policymakers on steps that need to be taken to mitigate it. The general consensus from these reports shows that we must cap warming to 1.5 degrees to avoid disastrous effects. However, recent modeling has predicted upward of 4 degrees of warming by 2030 if we don't implement further protocols and just keep business as usual emissions. However, we must keep in mind that there is still hope. Speaking from an American's perspective, although I do believe this transcends national bounds, climate change has become an extremely politicized topic. We have so many politicians, Joe Biden obviously one of them, who constantly quote the science despite clearly not having read the actual academic papers that are being released, especially the IPCC reports. Climate crisis, emergency, and disaster are all just words that they use with a surface-level understanding of the actual issue at hand. The main point is that when you read the actual reports and delve into the research that climate scientists are urgently slaving over and desperately seeking grants for, you don't see much of this hysteria. There's more hope than there is doom and gloom. This brings us to the topic of geoengineering. First, what is geoengineering? Geoengineering is described as the deliberate, large-scale manipulation of an environmental process that affects the Earth's climate in an attempt to counteract the effects of global warming. This is a contested strategy to mitigate climate change due to uncertainties in the effects of certain methods. This recent cap on sulfur dioxide emissions can be considered as a sort of accidental geoengineering. We now have direct evidence of how much sulfur dioxide contributes to cooling and can further develop the field of solar geoengineering. Solar geoengineering is the concept of spraying aerosols into the atmosphere to synthetically create these clouds that we saw from the shipping emissions, which reflect solar radiation. The sulfur dioxide from shipping emissions caused adverse health effects, but this is because they congregated in the lower atmosphere, whereas these synthetic clouds would be in the upper atmosphere. As solar radiation is predicted to continue increasing in Earth's future, this can be a particularly impactful strategy. The cost of this is relatively low, and modeling shows that by reflecting just 1% of the sunlight reaching Earth would be enough to cool the planet to pre-industrial levels, according to Douglas McMartin at Cornell. However, the constraints are fairly uncertain. There's potential that the sulfur dioxide could produce acid rain, which could deplete the ozone and actually increase warming. Regional precipitation patterns could also be affected, which are nearly impossible to predict. Furthermore, the strategy cannot reverse the effects of climate change that have already taken hold, such as ocean acidification. Because of this, if we are to take steps towards geoengineering, it is essential that we combine these efforts with protocols that reduce carbon emissions from burning fossil fuels. Policymakers must take direct, urgent action to mitigate and begin to reverse the climate change we have caused. The implications of potential 4-degree warming is disastrous, but if we neglect carbon reduction policy, it will be impossible to stay below the IPCC target of 1.5 degrees warming. Overall, we can see the positive effects of the IMO sulfur dioxide cap in preventing the negative effects of air pollution on our populations. Although there was warming as predicted, the lowered sulfur dioxide combined with the natural events to cause the 2023 spike in warming and carbon dioxide from fossil fuel emissions are still clearly the main culprit of our intense climate change. The protocol gave us insight into potential solar geoengineering that could prevent heat from solar radiation, but must be combined with policy reducing our fossil fuel emissions. There is hope for a better future, but we must take action now.